Settle in now and let the day grow quieter around you. Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will spend some time with Prometheus, one of the most enduring figures in Greek myth, a name often linked with fire, foresight, suffering, and the long shadow of divine punishment. In the old stories, he stands near the beginning of human memory, close to the moment when people first imagined the gift of flame, the cost of knowledge, and the tension between gods and mortals. If you enjoy these calm journeys through ancient stories, you are always welcome to like the video, subscribe, or leave a gentle comment if you feel like it. You might share where you are listening from tonight, or what quiet subject you would like to explore next. For now, though, there is nowhere to hurry. Let the room soften. Let your shoulders relax. Let the lamp light, the blanket, the pillow, and the slow rhythm of the narration create a small and peaceful distance from the world outside. We will move gently through the myth, the sources, the symbols, and the later meanings gathered around this figure, one unhurried detail at a time. And so, as the night settles more deeply, we begin with the first quiet facts about Prometheus. Prometheus is usually introduced as a titan, belonging to the older generation of divine beings in Greek myth. That detail matters because the titans are not simply large gods from a vague ancient past. They belong to a world before the Olympians, before Zeus and his court become the center of the mythic landscape. In that older layer of storytelling, Prometheus feels especially ancient, as though he belongs to a time when the world was still deciding how to work. He is often described as clever rather than merely powerful, and that distinction becomes one of the most important things about him. His name is commonly understood to mean something like forethought, or the one who thinks ahead. That meaning fits the way later stories remember him. He is not the loudest figure in Greek myth nor the most warlike, but one of the most mentally vivid. He sees consequences before they arrive. He understands choices before others do. In many myths, that kind of wisdom can be useful, but it can also be dangerous, especially when it crosses the will of the gods. Prometheus becomes a figure defined by that tension, a mind that reaches forward even when the world prefers obedience. The earliest Greek audiences may have known him as part of a broader family of divine beings tied to creation and order. He is sometimes linked to the shaping of humankind itself, which gives him a special place among mythic figures. Rather than simply ruling over a domain, he appears near the beginning of the human story. That proximity makes him feel intimate, almost like a founding ancestor in symbolic form. In the quieter corners of the tradition, he is not only a rebel but also a mediator. He stands between higher powers and ordinary mortal life. That position, balanced and uncertain, is central to his character. It allows the myths to ask what happens when intelligence, sympathy, and defiance meet in the same being. Prometheus is also one of those mythic figures whose story changed over time. Different poets, city traditions, and later writers emphasized different parts of him. Some saw him as a benefactor, some saw him as an overreacher, some treated him as a symbolic explanation for human progress. That flexibility helped him survive across centuries because he could be retold in many tones, from solemn to philosophical. And so, before the fire itself enters the story, Prometheus already stands as a figure of forward-looking mind, a being whose very identity seems to lean toward what is coming next. He belongs to the deep past, yet he is defined by anticipation. Among the most familiar ideas attached to Prometheus is the gift of fire. In mythic language, fire is never just heat. It is craft, cooking, light, protection, and transformation. To give fire to humanity is to give people the means to separate night from day, raw from cooked, vulnerability from shelter. The gift makes civilization possible in symbolic form, which is why the story has remained so powerful. A single flame can stand for all the things human beings learn to do once they are no longer entirely at the mercy of darkness. Yet the gift of fire is also a boundary crossing. In the old stories, it is not supposed to belong to mortals in quite the same way. Prometheus does not merely hand over a tool, he transgresses a cosmic rule. That is part of why the myth feels so charged. It is not only about generosity. It is also about the consequences of giving people more than the gods intended. The punishment that follows is one of the most famous images in all of Greek mythology. Prometheus is bound, often to a mountain, and an eagle comes to feed on his liver. The liver is then renewed, so the torment continues. Ancient listeners would have understood this as a form of endless suffering, a punishment that never reaches completion. It is not merely pain, but repetitive pain, the kind that makes time itself feel heavy. This image, severe and unforgettable, helped make Prometheus a symbol of endurance. He becomes someone who suffers for a principle, or perhaps for a choice made in sympathy with humanity. Later readers could admire that endurance, even if the original myth is not always sentimental about it. The fire story also helps explain why Prometheus is often remembered as a cultural hero. He is not a king, and not a warrior in the usual sense, but a bringer of technique and possibility. He stands near the earliest human tools, the first hearths, the first learned acts that make life communal instead of purely animal. In a quiet way, that is one reason his myth has remained so durable. It speaks to the first moment when human life begins to feel self-directed. The old Greek sources do not tell the story in one single uniform way. In some accounts, Prometheus steals the fire itself. In others, he hides it in a fennel stalk or similar vessel. That image of concealment matters because it gives the myth a hush, a sense of secret transport. The fire is not casually carried. It is taken under conditions of tension, as though the world is holding its breath. So the fire is both literal and symbolic, both a gift and a theft, both creative and disruptive. That double meaning is one of the reasons Prometheus remains so interesting. He is a figure who makes the world better and more dangerous at once, and the myth never entirely lets us separate those two things. Prometheus is often remembered as a champion of human beings, but the relationship is more nuanced than simple heroism. In many Greek myths, gods and mortals occupy very different levels of reality. Mortals are fragile, temporary, and limited. The gods are larger, stronger, and more secure. Prometheus is unusual because he seems to sympathize with the weaker side of that divide. He notices what human life lacks. He sees cold, darkness, and helplessness, and he acts. That action makes him almost a moral exception in the divine world. He is not loyal to power for its own sake. He does not simply preserve the existing order. Instead, he notices suffering and tries to alter the balance. This gives the myth a quiet emotional depth. It is not only about cosmic punishment, it is also about compassion and what compassion costs when it challenges authority. Ancient audiences may have heard this in very different ways. Some could have admired the bravery. Others may have worried about the chaos that follows any refusal to accept limits. Greek myth often holds both ideas at once. It does not always tell us whether disobedience is noble or foolish. Instead, it lets the tension remain. Prometheus's sympathy for human beings also makes him stand out from other divine figures associated with invention. He is not simply a craftsman of tools. He is a being who notices the human condition and responds to it. That sympathy is subtle, but it is powerful. It changes the myth from a technical story into an ethical one. When later writers think about Prometheus, they often focus on this human concern. He becomes almost the prototype of the benefactor who suffers because he helps others. That pattern appears in later philosophy, literature, and even modern retellings. The shape of the story remains recognizable because it touches a deep and enduring human feeling, the wish that wisdom and kindness could protect the weak, even when the world resists them. The tradition of Prometheus is older than many later philosophical interpretations, but those interpretations have become part of his afterlife. He is not only a mythic character, he is a lasting question about conscience, responsibility, and the price of intervention. The name Prometheus appears in Greek literature in several important early contexts. And that matters because myth was not fixed in the ancient world. It lived through performance, memory, recitation, and gradual elaboration. Different poets could shape the same figure in different ways, and audiences would hear the familiar outline while noticing the emphasis change. One of the most influential treatments is the tragedy Prometheus Bound, traditionally associated with Aeschylus, though scholars have long discussed questions of authorship and dramatic sequence. Whether or not every detail of that attribution is settled, the play deeply shaped later images of Prometheus. In it, he appears not as a distant folk figure, but as a suffering, speaking presence. The language of resistance becomes central. The mountain, the chains, and the eagle all belong to a theatrical vision that has echoed for centuries. Earlier poetic traditions are also important. Hesiod, for example, gives Prometheus a role in the ordering of the world and in the complicated relationship between gods and humans. Hesiod's version is often less sympathetic than later romantic interpretations. There, Prometheus can seem trickster-like, and his cleverness has consequences for everyone around him. That older tone is valuable because it reminds us that myths often carry warning as well as admiration. The figure also appears in philosophical writing, where he can become a model for human invention or a symbol of intelligence bound by cosmic law. Over time, he stops belonging only to myth and becomes a kind of cultural shorthand. To call someone Promethean is to suggest daring, creativity, and the bringing of something powerful into ordinary life. What is striking is that the story survives because it can be used in so many registers. It can be moral, tragic, political, artistic, or scientific. A single mythic name becomes a long shelf of meanings. In ancient Greece, fire was not an abstract concept. It was part of daily survival. It cooked food, lit homes, hardened tools, and created a center around which people gathered. When a myth says fire was given to humans, it is speaking to a deeply practical reality. Human beings without controlled fire are at the mercy of darkness and cold in a very immediate way. That is part of why the myth feels grounded even when it is fantastic. Fire is real, but the story tells us that knowing how to use it is a kind of sacred threshold. One can imagine early listeners sitting near a hearth and hearing the tale as an explanation of why the flame seems almost miraculous. It warms, but it also transforms. It can comfort or it can destroy. The myth preserves both aspects. Prometheus, in that sense, is tied to technological imagination. He represents the moment when a useful force is not simply discovered, but protected, carried, and intentionally delivered. He makes fire into an act of culture. That is why he often feels modern even though the myth is ancient. He belongs to the beginning of human making. The danger in the story is equally important. Once a tool exists, it cannot be made harmless again. Fire changes the world permanently. The myth therefore carries a quiet warning about progress. Some gifts cannot be given without cost. Some advances alter the relation between power and vulnerability forever. This is one reason Prometheus has such lasting appeal. He is not just the patron of invention. He is the figure who reminds us that every gift can arrive with consequence, and every bright flame casts a shadow somewhere nearby. One of the most famous later images connected to Prometheus is his punishment on a mountain, often imagined as Caucasus. The exact location shifts in different traditions, but the mountain setting itself is important. A high, barren place suggests distance from ordinary life. It is exposed to wind, cold, and isolation. That is fitting for a story about separation from both gods and people. The eagle that attacks him is not random symbolism. Eagles were associated with Zeus, and that connection makes the punishment feel like the visible arm of divine authority. The bird becomes an instrument of order, returning each day to enforce a sentence that never fully ends. The image is severe, but it is also strangely orderly. The torment has a rhythm. Morning brings the eagle. Evening brings a partial reprieve. Then the cycle begins again. That repetitive structure is part of what makes the myth so haunting. It is not a single moment of violence, it is an ongoing condition. The body is repaired only to be harmed again. Ancient and modern readers alike have felt the horror of that endless return. It turns time into a prison. At the same time, the mountain setting gives Prometheus a kind of lonely grandeur. He is isolated but not erased. He remains visible, suspended between endurance and anguish. In art and literature, this makes him one of the most powerful images of suffering under power. He is constrained, yet he cannot be made small. That paradox is one of the reasons the story remains so vivid. Prometheus is punished, but the punishment itself makes him memorable. The attempt to silence him ends by preserving him in cultural memory. Prometheus is often contrasted with another figure from mythic tradition, Prometheus, whose name suggests afterthought. This pairing is elegant and revealing. One brother thinks before acting, and the other acts before thinking is complete. The contrast is almost pedagogical, as if the myth wants to teach that foresight and hindsight belong to different temperaments. In some accounts, Prometheus receives gifts for animals and humans, or makes decisions that contribute to later trouble. The exact stories vary, but the contrast between the two figures remains central. Prometheus is the planner. Prometheus is the one who discovers the meaning of the choice too late. Together they create a kind of moral balance in the mythic imagination. This pairing is especially useful because it makes Prometheus more than a solitary rebel. He becomes part of a family of symbolic types. His intelligence stands out because there is another mind nearby that works differently. Ancient audiences would have recognized the value of such a contrast. Myths often teach through opposites. The names themselves are almost miniature lessons. Forethought and afterthought, preparation and reflection, anticipation and consequence. In this way, the mythic world turns into a meditation on timing. What matters is not only what one does, but when one understands what has been done. Prometheus, then, is not merely the one who steals fire. He is the one who embodies the ability to see ahead, and that ability becomes one of the deepest themes in the entire tradition. Prometheus is most often remembered as the one who brought fire to humanity, but in the oldest layers of Greek thought, he was also something stranger and more elusive, a being whose mind seemed to reach beyond ordinary divine loyalty. His very name is often connected to foresight, and that idea matters because it gives him a different kind of power than brute strength or thunderous authority. He is not simply a rebel in the modern sense. He is a figure of knowing before others know, of seeing a consequence while everyone else remains wrapped in the present moment. In the quiet architecture of the myth, this makes him feel almost like a thinker in the dark, listening ahead for what is coming. Ancient writers did not always agree on exactly what his name meant, and scholars still discuss how much of that interpretation belongs to later philosophical reading rather than the earliest tradition. Still, the sense of anticipation clings to him. Prometheus seems to stand one step ahead of the world, as if he can hear the next sentence before it is spoken. That subtle quality gives the story its unusual calm tension, because even in its most dramatic scenes, the figure at the center is shaped by thought as much as action. The punishment of Prometheus is one of the most famous images in Greek mythology, yet the details vary in the telling, and those variations matter. In some versions, Zeus orders him bound to a mountain, often imagined as the harsh, wind-cut edge of the Caucasus, where an eagle comes each day to feed on his liver. At night the organ grows back, so the torment begins again with the morning light. It is a repetitive punishment, which makes it feel almost mechanical, as if suffering has been turned into a cosmic rhythm. The image is terrible, but also strangely measured, like a ritual with no end. Ancient audiences would have recognized the liver as an organ linked to life and vitality, so the punishment becomes a direct assault on the seat of renewal itself. At the same time, the story belongs to a world in which the gods are not always distant abstractions. They act with force, pride, anger, and memory. Some later thinkers read this torment symbolically, as the pain of insight or resistance. Others treated it as straightforward mythic justice. Either way, the recurring eagle, the cold rock, and the returning wound make Prometheus one of the most unforgettable sufferers in all of literature, suspended between endurance and repetition. Before Prometheus was chained, he was already associated with a famous act of deception involving sacrifice, and this episode reveals how the myths often explain the distribution of powers between gods and mortals. In the well-known story, Prometheus divides an ox into two portions for Zeus to choose between. One portion hides the good meat beneath an unappetizing layer of fat and glossy appearance, while the other conceals bones beneath a more modest outer presentation. Zeus, or at least the Zeus of the tale, chooses the deceptive portion, and from that choice comes the custom that humans burn the bones and fat for the gods while keeping the edible meat for themselves. The story is playful on the surface, but its implications are serious. It explains sacrificial practice, while also suggesting that human civilization is built on trickery, negotiation, and the clever handling of appearances. Prometheus is not merely stealing fire, he is also rearranging the relationship between mortals and the divine through intelligence. The scene has a kind of deliberate calm before the consequences arrive, as if one small decision in a sacred meal has already altered the order of the world. Scholars have long debated whether this story preserves an older ritual explanation or a more literary invention, but in either case it shows how myth often works. A single act, almost casual in the telling, opens into a whole structure of religious life. Fire itself is one of the most layered symbols in the Prometheus tradition. In the simplest sense, it is warmth, light, and protection from darkness. It cooks food, hardens clay, and makes metal useful. It turns raw material into culture. But in Greek thought, fire also carries a more refined ambiguity. It is a divine gift, yet dangerous to possess. It comforts and destroys, illuminates and consumes. When Prometheus steals fire from the gods and brings it to human beings, the act feels at once generous and unsettling, because the gift comes with a change in human destiny. Before fire, life is more exposed to cold, to night, to appetite, to the limits of the body. After fire, humans can shape their world with greater independence. That independence, however, is never free. The same flame that makes life more hospitable can also lead to war, industry, and overreach. Ancient poets and philosophers returned again and again to this idea that civilization is inseparable from risk. Fire is not just a tool, it is a threshold. In the myth, Prometheus crosses that threshold on humanity's behalf, and once crossed, it cannot be uncrossed. Even now, when we think of fire in the Prometheus story, we are really thinking about the beginning of human skill and the price of being able to use it. There is also a deeply human side to Prometheus in some versions of the myth, especially where he is described as a creator or fashioner of people. Later traditions sometimes imagine him shaping human beings out of clay, as if he were kneading soft earth into living form. This image has a quiet, intimate feeling to it. Instead of a thunderous birth from heaven, humanity emerges from the hands of a craftsman. Clay is humble, earthy, and fragile, and that fragility suits the myth well. The idea that people are made from ground material appears in many cultures, but in the Prometheus tradition it takes on an especially reflective tone. If he formed humans, then his later sympathy for them feels almost familial. He is not helping strangers, he is defending his own unfinished work. Some ancient authors linked this creative role to later ideas about the shaping of the soul, while others treated it as an elegant embellishment on the older fire-stealing tale. The uncertainty itself is interesting, because Prometheus seems to belong to a mythic family that kept growing over time, gathering new meanings as Greek thought matured. He becomes a maker, a teacher, a rebel, and a witness to human vulnerability. There is something gentle in that creative image, even before the suffering begins. The figure of Prometheus also lives in a world of family conflict, and the family tree around him is as tangled as many Greek myths. He is commonly described as a titan, one of the older divine powers who stand before the Olympian order. His father is usually named as Iapetus, while his mother is often said to be Clymene or Asia, depending on the source. His brothers, including Epimetheus, Atlas, and Menoetius in some traditions, each seem to embody different destinies or attitudes toward power. Epimetheus, whose name suggests afterthought, is often the one who acts too late. Atlas bears the sky. Menoetius is associated with force and destruction. Prometheus, by contrast, sees ahead. The family names themselves feel like compact philosophical notes. Ancient audiences may have enjoyed the pattern, but later readers found in it a whole meditation on planning, labor, and consequence. The genealogies are not always consistent, and different authors arrange the relatives differently, which is typical of Greek myth. Yet the broad shape remains meaningful. Prometheus is not isolated. He is part of an old divine generation, one that carries the memory of conflict between the ancient and the new. That background makes his choice feel even more poignant, because his defiance is not the act of a lone outcast. It is the expression of a family strain running deep through the mythic past. Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, appears in the story with a very different energy, and the contrast between them is one of the more quietly beautiful features of the myth. If Prometheus is foresight, Epimetheus is hindsight, the one who understands too late. In some tellings, Prometheus warns him not to accept gifts from Zeus, but Epimetheus nevertheless receives Pandora, and with her comes the opening of the famous jar or container that releases troubles into the world. The brothers form a kind of mirrored pair, almost like two tempos of thought. One anticipates danger, the other discovers it after it has already arrived. This relationship gives the Prometheus cycle a deeply human resonance because most people know both ways of being. There are moments of clear warning and moments of delayed understanding. The myth does not simply blame Epimetheus, it uses him to show how ordinary human vulnerability is built into the pattern of decision itself. Prometheus can foresee, but foresight does not always prevent harm. Epimetheus can regret, but regret does not repair what has been released. The contrast between them gives the story a soft, thoughtful sadness, the kind that settles in when one realizes that wisdom and delay are often close companions. Pandora's place in the Prometheus tradition is especially significant because her story often follows immediately after Prometheus's act of stealing fire. In later Greek accounts, Zeus creates Pandora as a response to the theft, sending her to humanity as a beautiful and irresistible consequence. Her arrival is not simple punishment in a crude sense, but rather a complex countermeasure, a divine answer to human advancement. Through her, the world becomes more complicated. Misery, labor, sickness, and grief enter the human condition, depending on the version of the tale, though hope remains inside the container in some form. The imagery of a sealed vessel or jar gives the myth a patient, enclosed quality, as though all the world's latent troubles were waiting in silence behind a lid. It is worth noting that later retellings often shift between jar and box, and scholars regularly point out that the original Greek term refers to a storage vessel rather than a decorative box. This may seem small, but such details change the atmosphere of the story. A jar is earthier, older, more domestic, more tied to storage and sustenance. In that form, Pandora's story feels even closer to household life. It is not merely a cosmic drama. It is something that enters the human home and changes the texture of daily existence. In the Prometheus cycle, the consequences of divine conflict do not remain in the sky. They come down to the hearth, the doorway, the sleeping place, and the fragile routines of human living. Aeschylus gave Prometheus one of his most enduring literary forms in the tragedy Prometheus Bound, a play that has shaped how later generations imagine the Titan's voice. In that work, Prometheus is not just punished. He speaks with remarkable dignity, endurance, and sometimes bitter clarity. The play is often treated as part of a larger lost trilogy, and because only the first drama survives, there is still some mystery around the full shape of the original sequence. That missing context only deepens the atmosphere. We have Prometheus bound, but not all the surrounding echoes that would once have made his suffering part of a wider dramatic arc. In Aeschylus's hands, he becomes a figure who refuses to bow internally even when his body is immobilized. He speaks to Oceanus, to the chorus of Oceanids, to Io, and eventually to Hermes, and through these encounters, the play unfolds as a meditation on authority, compassion, and stubborn truth. The language is elevated but also intimate, giving the sense that the Titan's pain has become a place where large questions gather. Many readers have felt that the play turns Prometheus into something like a martyr for knowledge and pity. Others caution that the surviving text reflects a specific tragic vision rather than the whole mythic tradition. Still, Aeschylus fixed an image that is hard to forget: a chained figure, speaking into the wind, knowing much, suffering more, and refusing to surrender the dignity of his mind. Some later interpreters moved Prometheus beyond mythology and into the realm of philosophy, seeing him as a symbol of reason, technical skill, and the human struggle to master nature. In this reading, the fire he brings is not merely physical flame, but the beginning of craft, language, mathematics, and all the arts of making. The myth then becomes a story about civilization itself, about the transformation of raw possibility into ordered life. This is one reason Prometheus remained so influential in later European thought. He could be read as a hero of human ingenuity, a rebel against tyranny, or a warning about the cost of ambition. His story was especially attractive to writers who wanted to explore the tension between freedom and authority, yet the classical world itself did not present him as a simple champion of progress in the modern sense. The Greeks knew that skill can produce beauty and also disaster. The same intelligence that steals fire can also divide communities and invite punishment. Prometheus, therefore, sits at a thoughtful crossroads. He is not pure victory over the gods. He is not pure suffering either. He is the uneasy middle place where invention meets consequence. That makes him unusually modern in feeling, though he remains deeply ancient in form. Even the language used around Prometheus in ancient sources suggests movement between clarity and uncertainty. Some details of his myth are firmly established in the surviving texts, while others are woven in from later poets, tragedians, philosophers, and local traditions. This means that Prometheus is less a single fixed character than a gradually deepening presence. He accumulates meanings across time. One author emphasizes his deception at the sacrificial division, another his gift of fire, another his creation of humankind, another his defiance under torture. The myth does not collapse under these differences. Instead, it grows richer, like a stone polished by many hands. That layering gives Prometheus a special stillness because he is always both known and not fully known. Perhaps that is part of why he endures so easily in memory. He belongs to the ancient world, but he never becomes fully sealed inside it. There is always another interpretation waiting just beyond the last one. And so, as his story continues through Greek poetry and later reflection, Prometheus remains a figure of patient complexity, carrying within him the cold mountain, the stolen flame, the long view, and the quiet burden of what it means to help a fragile species become itself. Prometheus is often remembered first as a rebel, but in the old Greek imagination, he was also a figure of patience, craft, and long memory. His story begins in a world where the gods did not simply rule from a distance, but shaped the smallest parts of life, from the grain in the field to the fire in a hearth. In that setting, Prometheus stands out because he does not belong to raw power or thunderous command. He belongs to cleverness, to forethought, to the quiet kind of intelligence that notices what others overlook. Even his name is often linked with anticipation, with thinking ahead. That idea feels especially fitting for a figure who watches over fragile human beginnings, as though he sees what people might become before they know it themselves. Ancient audiences likely heard in him both admiration and unease, because foresight can be a blessing, but it can also carry the burden of knowing too much in advance. And so from the start, Prometheus feels less like a loud hero and more like a steady presence in the background of myth, someone bending close to human life and studying it with careful attention. One of the most familiar parts of his story is the gift of fire, yet even this is more layered than the simple image suggests. Fire in the ancient world was never just warmth. It meant cooked food, hardening clay, shaping metal, protection in the dark, and the possibility of a home that could be gathered around at night. In a sense, fire is civilization in miniature, glowing softly at the center of human life. When Prometheus brings fire to humanity, he is not only handing over a tool, he is altering the relationship between people and the natural world. The ancient poets describe the theft with striking imagery, sometimes treating the flame as something hidden in a stalk of fennel, a small vessel for a transformative power. That detail gives the moment a hushed, almost secret quality, as if the first fire were carried close to the body under a cloak, kept safe from the eyes of authority. It is easy to imagine the warmth spreading through a dark settlement, the sudden light on faces, the smell of smoke, the first secure evening that might have followed. Prometheus becomes, in that moment, the bearer of possibility. Yet the fire story is only one part of a broader pattern in which Prometheus repeatedly shows sympathy for mortals against divine order. In some versions, he helps human beings by tricking Zeus at a sacrificial division, arranging for the better portions of meat to remain with humans, while the gods receive the less appetizing bones wrapped in attractive fat. This mythic scene is both playful and serious. It explains ritual practice, but it also reveals something about ancient ideas of social negotiation. Sacrifice was not just a gift to the gods, it was a way of dividing the world, of deciding who receives abundance and who must accept limitation. Prometheus, through his cunning, tips that balance in favor of humankind, but not without consequence. The story suggests that divine and human interests are always in delicate tension, and that intelligence can win only briefly against force. There is a dry, almost ritual humor in the tale, but beneath it lies a somber truth. The ordering of life depends on arrangements that can be broken, and once broken, they are difficult to restore. Prometheus is the one who reveals that fragility. His punishment is among the most famous in Greek myth, and it has endured because it is so physically vivid. Bound to a remote mountain, often imagined in the Caucasus, Prometheus is condemned to have an eagle devour his liver by day, only for the organ to regenerate and be torn again the next day. The image is harsh, but also strangely methodical, as if suffering has become a cycle without end. Ancient storytellers do not present this as a fleeting cruelty. They present it as a durable arrangement, a kind of cosmic sentence. The liver mattered in Greek thought as a seat of emotion and vitality, so the repetition of the wound carries more than physical pain. It becomes a symbol of ongoing vulnerability, of life that is constantly being consumed and restored. There is something almost weather-like in the way the punishment unfolds, as if each day brings the same bitter climate. And in the silence between the visits of the eagle, one can imagine the mountain itself standing unchanged, cold and patient, bearing witness to endurance stretched beyond ordinary limits. The myth invites sympathy, but it also asks listeners to think about the cost of defiance. Even so, the punishment does not erase Prometheus's dignity. In many retellings, he remains stubborn, unbroken, and intellectually superior, even in chains. This has made him a compelling figure for later writers, artists, and philosophers, who often saw in him a symbol of resistance against arbitrary power. But the ancient sources are not all of one mind about him. Some portray him as a savior of humankind, almost saintly in his concern for mortal weakness. Others seem more cautious, suggesting that his cleverness itself is dangerous because it disrupts the proper boundaries between gods and humans. That ambiguity is part of the myth's lasting strength. Prometheus is not a simple hero who does good without complication. He is a being whose compassion takes the form of disobedience. In that sense, he occupies a place between admiration and warning. Ancient Greek culture often valued moderation, order, and respect for divine hierarchy, so Prometheus stands out precisely because he does not fit neatly within those ideals. He is sympathetic, but also disruptive, protective, but also transgressive. His story lingers because it refuses to reduce him to one clear moral shape. A quieter and less famous aspect of Prometheus is his relationship to the creation of human beings. In some traditions, he is said to have molded humans from clay or earth, shaping them with his hands. This image is especially tender. It places the origin of humanity in the realm of touch, patience, and artistry. The earth in such stories is not a cold substance but a living material, soft enough to be formed, yet weighty enough to remember the shape given to it. When Prometheus creates humans, he is often acting not as a ruler but as an artisan, someone bent over a work surface, attentive to detail. The picture has a kind of workshop intimacy to it. One can imagine the damp clay, the pressure of fingers, the slow emergence of limbs and faces. This is one reason Prometheus became so important in later interpretations. He is not only the thief of fire, but the maker, the shaper, the one who sees humanity as a project worth beginning at all. That act of formation, however, also makes his later punishment feel even more poignant, because he suffers for the very beings he helped bring into the world. The ancient world also connected Prometheus with sacrifice, and sacrifice is one of those rituals that sounds simple until one looks more closely at it. It involved flames, smoke, scent, and carefully arranged portions of meat, but it also carried social meaning because it marked the relationship between gods and worshippers. Prometheus's trick at Mekon, where he divides an ox into deceptive portions, is therefore not just a clever prank. It explains why humans retain the edible meat while the gods receive the symbolic bones. This detail gives the myth a domestic realism. It situates divine history inside the ordinary acts of preparing food, piling ash, and offering steam to the sky. In scholarly readings, the story may preserve an old explanation for ritual custom, but it also dramatizes a fundamental divide. Humans must work with what is nourishing, while gods can receive signs and honors. Prometheus's role in that division is subtle. He does not abolish hierarchy, he manipulates it. He creates a pattern in which humans continue to live by eating, while the gods remain marked by the burnt remains that rise upward in scent and smoke. It is a small, smoky compromise, and the whole world of sacrifice seems to hover in it. As the myth developed, Prometheus began to gather associations beyond his earliest Greek settings. Later thinkers, especially in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, explored him as a model of reason, craftsmanship, and even scientific curiosity. In some philosophical readings, he becomes less a mythic trickster and more an emblem of human ingenuity itself. That shift is important because it shows how adaptable the figure was. He could belong to poetry, ritual explanation, tragedy, and philosophy all at once. In a culture increasingly interested in the powers of the mind, Prometheus could be read as the one who brings not just flame but technique, the skills by which people build, shape, and improve their lives. His name then begins to feel almost like a shorthand for invention. The gentle irony is that invention in myth often arrives through theft, danger, or sorrow. The Greeks did not imagine progress as clean or painless. They saw it as something acquired at a cost, and Prometheus is the cost made visible. Even in later intellectual traditions, his story remains shadowed by that first act of taking what was forbidden and placing it in human hands. Prometheus is also tied to the larger family of Titans, the older powers who came before the Olympian gods. That ancestry matters because it places him in a world of ancient, foundational forces rather than youthful divine order. The Titans are often associated with earlier layers of cosmology, the rougher material of myth before Zeus's rule is fully established. Prometheus, however, is unusual among them. Instead of opposing Zeus on behalf of Titan kin, he often sides with humans or stands apart from the struggle altogether. This makes him something of an internal dissenter, a Titan who does not fully embody Titan resistance. Ancient audiences may have found that compelling because it suggests that wisdom and loyalty do not always point in the same direction. He is old enough to belong to the ancient order, but thoughtful enough to recognize the humanity of those beneath the gods. His position is therefore unstable, almost lonely. He is neither fully at home among the mighty nor wholly among the vulnerable, and that in-between condition gives the myth an atmosphere of quiet estrangement. One of the most enduring elements of Prometheus's story is the question of whether his suffering is justified by the scale of his gift. That question has echoed through centuries of interpretation. If he gave fire, language, skill, and perhaps even the beginnings of culture, was the price of his torment too high, or is the myth warning that every great advance carries consequences the giver cannot escape? Ancient Greek tragedy often loved these tensions. It did not insist that suffering be neatly balanced by reward. Instead, it allowed noble acts to lead into ruin and mercy to invite conflict. Prometheus belongs to that tragic logic. His gift is beautiful, but it triggers a chain of punishment, conflict, and delayed release. The story becomes almost meditative in its structure: action, consequence, endurance, repetition. It asks listeners to sit with the discomfort of moral complexity. There is no easy peace in it. Even the rescue of Prometheus in some later accounts, when Heracles eventually kills the eagle, does not fully erase the memory of his torment. The wound remains part of the meaning. This is one reason the myth has survived so powerfully. It does not resolve the tension between generosity and suffering. It leaves them close together, like embers under ash. And perhaps that is why Prometheus still feels strangely modern. He represents the unsettling idea that knowledge and advancement are never purely innocent, that helping humanity may require crossing a line, and that punishment often follows those who challenge established power. His story has been read in political, scientific, artistic, and even psychological terms, but at its heart it remains an ancient meditation on human dependence. Fire is still there, at the center of the tale, glowing softly as both comfort and danger. Prometheus stands beside it as a figure of foresight, sacrifice, and loneliness, holding in one mythic body the promise and cost of becoming human. In the older Greek imagination, Prometheus is not only a single figure with a single crime, but part of a wider, older current of stories about the difficult bargain between gods, humans, and the fragile comforts of civilization. His name is often understood as meaning foresight or thought before action, and that quality shapes much of what he does. He is not simply rebellious for the sake of rebellion. He calculates, anticipates, and tries to outmaneuver power. In some versions, this makes him seem almost like a divine strategist, patient and quiet, the kind of mind that watches a problem from many angles before moving at all. That slow intelligence gives his myth a particular stillness, even when the events are dramatic. He is tied to the dawn of human life, to the early knowledge that people do not survive on instinct alone, and that the world must be negotiated carefully. Fire, tools, sacrifice, memory, language, and planning all gather around him like distant embers. Because of this, Prometheus often feels less like a single character and more like a symbol of the moment when consciousness becomes burdened with choice. The Greeks, who loved to explore the tension between cleverness and suffering, found in him a story that never quite settles. He is honored in some places, punished in others, and remembered as both helper and troublemaker. That doubleness is part of his enduring atmosphere, as if he stands at the threshold between comfort and consequence, looking ahead before the rest of us do. One of the quietest and most important details in the Prometheus tradition is the role of sacrifice, especially the division of an offering between gods and humans. In the famous story at Mecone, Prometheus arranges an ox into two piles, one made to look generous but containing bones wrapped in appealing fat, the other less attractive in appearance but rich in edible meat. Zeus chooses the deceptive, shining portion, and from that choice comes the custom of sacrifice as the Greeks knew it. The tale is not just about trickery. It is about appearances, ritual, and the strange social logic that binds mortals to gods. In this mythic memory, sacrifice becomes a carefully negotiated meal, a way of marking distance while still maintaining connection. The gods receive smoke and bones while humans keep the nourishing flesh. The story explains a practice, but it also reflects a larger truth about how communities understand obligation. The sacred is not free and neither is sustenance. There is always a division, a boundary, a formal exchange. Prometheus, in guiding that exchange, becomes the architect of a world in which humans may eat, remember, and honor the divine without fully surrendering themselves. Some ancient writers emphasize the cleverness of the trick, while others stress Zeus's anger at being misled. Either way, the story is calm on the surface and deep underneath, like a bowl of still water hiding a long, invisible current. The punishment that follows the theft of fire is one of the most famous scenes in all mythology, yet it is often told with a solemn simplicity that makes it feel almost ceremonial. Prometheus is chained to a rock, usually placed in the wild edges of the Caucasus, far from cities and farms and the ordinary human world. There, every day, an eagle comes to feed on his liver, and every night the organ grows back, renewing the torment. The image is vivid, but it is also strangely cyclical, almost ritual in its repetition. Suffering is not delivered once and ended. It returns, it resets, it endures. Ancient audiences may have heard in this punishment a reflection of cosmic law or of the idea that some offenses against order cannot be forgiven easily. The liver itself mattered in Greek thought as a seat of vitality and emotion, and so the attack upon it carried both physical and symbolic force. Because the wound is renewed each night, the myth becomes a meditation on persistence rather than finality. There is no clean ending inside the punishment, only recurrence. Prometheus remains alert, conscious, resistant. Even in agony, he does not disappear. Later authors sometimes heighten the drama of his endurance, making him a hero of silence, someone whose defiance is measured not in speeches, but in continued existence. The rock, the bird, the sky, and the cold mountain air create a landscape that feels spare and unmoving, a world in which time itself seems to stretch. Although Prometheus is often remembered for fire, some versions of the myth also connect him to the shaping of human beings themselves. In certain traditions, he fashions humans from clay, water, or earth, giving them form as a craftsman would shape a vessel or figurine. This idea links him to the intimate, hands-on act of making, and it adds a tender note to his character. He is not only a thief of divine power but a maker, one who needs raw material into something upright and living. The image of clay is especially resonant because it suggests vulnerability. Human beings are made from the ground, easily broken, easily remade, never entirely separate from the dust that formed them. In some later retellings, the goddess Athene assists him or breathes life into the forms he creates, though the details vary from source to source. That variation itself is part of the story's texture. The ancient tradition does not preserve one rigid account, but several overlapping echoes. What remains consistent is the sense that humanity is handcrafted, not incidental. Humans are made with intention, but they are also unfinished, requiring fire, skill, and experience to become what they are. Prometheus, as maker, gives us a mythic origin that feels close and tactile. Earth beneath the fingernails, damp clay in the palm, the quiet patience of shaping a being meant to stand in a difficult world. It is worth lingering on the idea of fire because in the Prometheus story it is never only fire. It is warmth, cooking, light, metallurgy, protection, and transformation all at once. Before fire belongs to the hearth, it belongs to the gods, or to nature, or to some inaccessible place beyond ordinary use. Prometheus steals it, but what he brings down is not merely a flame. He brings possibility. Cooked food can be made more digestible. Nights become less absolute. Metal can be worked. Tools can be hardened. The boundaries of human life widen. Ancient authors understood, perhaps instinctively, that fire changes everything it touches, not only physically but socially. A community gathered around flame is different from a community living in darkness. Stories lengthen, meals become shared, work extends into new forms. Fire also suggests knowledge, and knowledge is often dangerous precisely because it cannot be contained once given. That is why the gift is so closely tied to punishment. To illuminate is also to expose. To empower is also to unsettle. Prometheus's act, therefore, has the double quality of blessing and rupture. In one sense, he improves life for mortals. In another, he introduces the conditions under which human ambition, craft, and suffering will all grow together. The warmth of the hearth becomes inseparable from the heat of conflict. Even so, the myth does not treat this as a simple error. It treats it as the beginning of a recognizable human condition, one in which comfort and consequence arrive together and remain difficult to separate. Among the later figures connected to Prometheus, few are as fascinating as his son Deucalion, who appears in Greek flood traditions as a kind of surviving remnant of humanity. In the broad outline of the story, Zeus sends a great flood to cleanse the earth, and Deucalion, warned in advance, survives with his wife Pyrrha by floating in a chest or vessel until the waters recede. Afterward, they repopulate the world in a mysterious and symbolic manner, casting stones over their shoulders that transform into people. The tale varies in detail, but its atmosphere is unmistakable, quiet, post-catastrophic, almost hushed. This family connection deepens Prometheus's role as a figure of continuity. He is not only the giver of fire but the ancestor of survival. Through Deucalion, his line persists beyond destruction. The flood myth also echoes older Near Eastern traditions, reminding us that myths travel, borrow, and adapt across cultures. Yet the Greek version retains its own tone. The world after flood is not presented with great noise. It is emptied, then slowly repopulated. Stone becomes flesh. Human society begins again. In that setting, Prometheus stands at the far edge of memory, a father whose actions belong to an earlier age but whose consequences reach into the renewed world. The lineage itself seems to say that wisdom, foresight, and endurance are inherited forms of resilience, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Prometheus also becomes a favorite figure for ancient tragedians and later philosophers because his story allows them to ask whether cleverness is a virtue when it defies power. In Aeschylus's great play Prometheus Bound, he is not a comic trickster at all, but a majestic sufferer, an unbending voice on a barren cliff. He speaks with dignity, names his services to humankind, and refuses to submit to Zeus's authority. The play gives him a kind of grandeur that is almost unsettling. He is immobile, yet morally larger than the forces that imprison him. At the same time, Aeschylus leaves open questions about justice. Is Zeus merely a tyrant, or is he still a force of cosmic order not yet fully understood? Are Prometheus's gifts wholly noble, or do they also usher in forms of burden and hubris? The tragedy does not rush to answer. It lingers in the tension. That is one reason the myth remained so powerful. It is not a simple celebration of defiance. It is an examination of what defiance costs, and of what kind of world is created when a lesser power confronts a greater one for the sake of others. The language of the play, preserved in fragments and later quotations, conveys a bleak grandeur. Wind, stone, chains, and sky become a stage for moral argument. Prometheus does not merely endure his sentence, he turns suffering into testimony. In the philosophical imagination, Prometheus sometimes appears alongside his brother Epimetheus, whose name means thought after action. The contrast between them is almost too neat, yet ancient authors clearly found it useful. Prometheus plans ahead, Epimetheus realizes too late. One embodies anticipation, the other reflection that arrives after consequences have already taken shape. In Plato's dialogue Protagoras, the brothers participate in the distribution of qualities to living creatures, and Epimetheus exhausts the available gifts before humans are properly equipped. Prometheus then has to intervene with fire and technical skill to compensate for the imbalance. This pairing gives the myth a subtle educational quality. It suggests that foresight and improvisation must work together if life is to continue. Humans are often late to understand what they needed all along. The names themselves carry a soft ethical rhythm, as if they were designed to be remembered in the quiet of contemplation. Prometheus's value is not absolute perfection but readiness. Epimetheus's flaw is not stupidity but untimeliness. That distinction matters. The myth becomes less about good and evil than about timing, judgment, and the consequences of acting too soon or too late. In that sense, the brothers mirror the human condition. We are always moving between anticipation and hindsight, between what we could have known and what we now must live with. The story holds that tension gently without trying to resolve it. In some of the oldest surviving references, Prometheus is not presented as a fully isolated rebel, but as part of a divine family network, often associated with the Titans. This lineage matters because the Titans occupy a transitional place in Greek thought, older than the Olympian gods and yet not entirely erased by them. They belong to an earlier age of the cosmos, one that is rawer, larger, and in some ways more elemental. Prometheus, as a Titan, carries that older gravity. He is not a minor spirit or a localized helper. He comes from a generation that can still rival Zeus, even if only in memory and mythic status. The Titan background also places him within a larger cycle of succession, where rule passes from one divine order to another through conflict, restraint, and eventual settlement. Ancient audiences may have sensed in this the way older forms of power do not vanish neatly. They are contained, transformed, remembered. Prometheus, unlike many of his Titan kin, is not simply cast as an enemy. He becomes a bridge between orders. That role makes him especially enduring. He is ancient enough to belong to the old world, but humane enough to care for the new. The result is a figure who feels layered, almost geological. Beneath his story lie older myths, older anxieties, older hopes, all compressed together like strata in stone. The image of Prometheus with the eagle is so strong that it can be easy to forget how much of the myth's power lies in the setting around him. The mountain is not just a place of punishment, it is a place of exposure. High altitude, cold air, long horizons, and thin human company create a mood of removal from ordinary life. Ancient Greek literature often used mountains as spaces where gods reveal themselves or where human beings are stripped of convenience. In Prometheus's case, the mountain becomes a kind of suspended world, neither entirely earthly nor fully divine. His body is left in a location that emphasizes distance and endurance. The landscape does not comfort him, but it also does not erase him. It holds him in place. That visual and emotional austerity may be one reason the myth has remained so memorable for artists, poets, and later political thinkers. A chained figure on a cliff facing sky and bird and weather can stand for resistance, isolation, martyrdom, or unresolved justice. Yet the scene also has a quietness to it. There is no city noise, no crowd, no court, only height and wind and repetition. The myth invites contemplation not because it is loud, but because it is stark. The loneliness of the mountain makes every element feel deliberate, as if the world itself has paused to witness what happens when a giver of gifts is made to suffer for them. And even after all the punishments, revisions, and symbolic meanings, Prometheus remains, at the center of the tradition, a figure of human nearness. That may be the deepest reason he endures. He is a god or titan or ancient maker, but he acts with a concern that feels close to us. He notices what creatures need. He worries about the shape of their lives. He steals warmth for the cold, craft for the helpless, and knowledge for those who cannot yet survive without it. The myths surrounding him preserve a delicate balance between reverence and sympathy. He is too powerful to be merely human, yet too compassionate to be distant. That combination makes him feel almost intimate, as if he belongs to the same broad family of beings that includes teachers, inventors, caregivers, and those who quietly prepare for hardships before anyone else sees them coming. In sleep, perhaps this is the softer edge of the Prometheus story, the reminder that foresight can be an act of care, and that gifts may come wrapped in danger but still be gifts. The old myths do not promise ease, they offer recognition. They tell us that suffering and support, risk and relief often arrive together, and that the one who first notices this may bear the longest burden of all. Prometheus is often remembered first for one image, a being bound in punishment, exposed to the elements, waiting in a loneliness so complete that even the landscape seems to listen. Yet the ancient stories around him are not built from punishment alone. They also preserve a quieter idea, that his suffering was meant to stand as a warning about the cost of crossing divine boundaries, and about the strange tenderness hidden inside rebellion. In some versions, the chain is not only a restraint but a symbol of fixed order, as if the world itself has been fastened in place. The rock, too, matters. It is not just a surface for pain, but a durable, unmoving thing, a kind of cliff edge between heaven and earth. That setting makes Prometheus feel suspended between realms, neither fully mortal nor safely divine, held in a space where time seems to slow and become almost audible. The name Prometheus carries its own gentle mystery, because Greek writers and later scholars have long debated what it originally meant and how it was understood. It is usually connected with the idea of forethought, the one who thinks ahead, and this fits the figure remarkably well. Prometheus is not the impulsive fire thief of a simple moral tale. He is a planner, a watcher, someone who sees consequences before they arrive. That quality gives him a feeling of quiet intelligence rather than dramatic impulse. In a mythic world crowded with strength, anger, and sudden interventions, forethought becomes its own kind of power. It also gives the story a reflective atmosphere, because Prometheus does not merely act. He anticipates, arranges, and calculates. The ancient Greeks valued that kind of wisdom deeply, especially when set against the dangers of hubris or blind force. One of the most enduring parts of the Prometheus story is his relationship to sacrifice, especially the well-known account of the divided ox at Mecone. In that scene, he arranges the portions of an animal offering so that humans receive the usable meat, while the gods are left with the gleaming bones hidden beneath tempting fat. The story feels almost domestic in its details, with smoke rising from an altar and the smell of cooked flesh drifting upward, yet it also explains something vast. Why sacrifices in Greek ritual involved the burning of parts for the gods and the sharing of the rest among people. This is one reason Prometheus belongs not only to myth, but also to the lived religious imagination of the ancient world. He becomes a figure through whom the practical and the sacred meet, as if the first meal after a ritual separation had been preserved in story form. Some ancient authors present the episode as a clever trick, others as a foundational arrangement, and the difference tells us that myth was never fixed in a single shape. It was retold softly, changed by each voice that carried it. Fire, of course, is the element most closely attached to Prometheus, and in ancient imagination it was never just a tool. It was warmth in winter, light against darkness, metal softened in the forge, bread browned over coals, and protection against predators. To give fire to humans was to alter daily life at its core. It meant longer evenings, safer cooking, better crafts, and a kind of human presence that could continue after sunset. In that sense, the gift is almost practical enough to be invisible, even though myth makes it grand. When Prometheus hides the fire in a fennel stalk or another carrying vessel, depending on the version, the image suggests careful secrecy rather than spectacle. It is a small transport of a huge blessing. The myth invites us to imagine the first visible spark in a dark world, and to feel how startling it would have been to see flame under human control. Even now, a fire in the night has the power to gather attention and soften the edges of a room. There is also a quieter scholarly fascination with the possibility that Prometheus may not have been originally a single, neatly defined figure. In some ancient sources, he appears in ways that suggest local cult traditions, older pre-Greek associations, or layered interpretations over time. That uncertainty is part of what makes him feel ancient in a deep sense. He is not a character preserved in one frozen portrait. He is a mythic shape that accumulated meaning. Different poets emphasize different elements: his cunning, his compassion, his suffering, his role as cultural benefactor. In the works of Hesiod, for instance, he can appear as a deceptive and dangerous opponent of Zeus, while later tragic treatments allow more sympathy and grandeur. This shifting quality is common in mythology, but Prometheus is especially interesting because the shifts are so visible. He can be both helpful and disruptive, both protector and transgressor, and that doubleness gives the story a steady, almost contemplative complexity. His punishment is among the most vivid in all ancient literature, yet even that punishment was told with variations. The most famous account has Zeus sending an eagle to feed on Prometheus's liver each day, only for the organ to regenerate by night so the torment can begin again at dawn. The ancient Greeks believed the liver was closely tied to emotion, vitality, and inward life, which makes the detail feel especially intimate. This is not pain at the surface only, it is pain at the center of being. The repetition matters too. Eternal recurrence gives the myth its slow, endless rhythm, like a wave that returns to the shore without ever tiring. Some later interpretations soften or amplify the scene, but the basic pattern remains, a cycle of injury and renewal. That cycle has helped the myth endure because it mirrors forms of human endurance that are familiar even when they are not as dramatic. Sorrow can be repetitive, so can hope, so can the body's own effort to recover. And yet the myth does not remain locked in suffering. One of the reasons Prometheus has continued to fascinate readers is that he seems to know something about the future, or at least enough to stand apart from the present moment. In Aeschylus's great dramatic treatment, he is not merely a victim but a bearer of knowledge. He possesses secrets that even Zeus needs, especially the prophecy about a future marriage that could threaten divine power. This gives the story a deep undercurrent of stillness beneath the storm. Prometheus, despite his chains, is not helpless in every sense. He guards information, he waits, he understands the shape of time better than the rulers around him. The result is a myth that feels almost quiet at its center, as though wisdom itself were the deepest form of resistance. It is not noisy, it does not rush, it sits in the dark and remains unbroken. The figure of Prometheus also became linked, especially in later eras, with human creativity and technical skill. In Greek thought, the fire he brings is a gateway to the arts of civilization: cooking, metalworking, measurement, building, and invention. For this reason, artists and writers later began to see him as a symbol of science, progress, and imagination. The association was not exactly ancient in the same form we use it now, but it grew naturally from the myth's core image of a gift that transforms life. Even a simple hearth becomes, under this interpretation, the beginning of craft and knowledge. There is something soothing in that idea because it places human making inside a long continuum of patient learning. A spark becomes a flame becomes a forge becomes a tool, and the tool becomes a vessel, a shelter, a plough, a home. Prometheus stands at the far beginning of that chain, not as a loud inventor, but as a quiet initiator of possibility. At the same time, The myth never lets innovation appear without cost. Ancient audiences were keenly aware that fire was dangerous as well as useful. It could warm, but it could also consume. It could illuminate a path, or spread uncontrollably through a forest or a roof of thatch. In this way, Prometheus embodies one of mythology's gentler truths. Every gift changes the world by introducing risk. The story does not pretend that human advancement is simple. Instead, it wraps benefit and danger together like threads in the same cloth. That is part of what makes the myth feel enduringly modern. Even now, when people speak of technology, discovery, or invention, they often sense the same double edge. Prometheus gives the flame, but the flame does not belong only to comfort. It also asks for responsibility. The ancient world understood that a small bright thing can alter everything around it, and that knowledge itself is never completely innocent. There is a softer and more reflective side to Prometheus as well, especially in his connection with the creation of human beings in some later traditions. While not every ancient source gives him this role, many later retellings imagine him shaping humanity from clay or participating in its formation. This makes him feel like a maker in the oldest sense, a figure who handles earth with careful hands. Clay is a calm, humble material. It does not shine like bronze or blaze like fire. It rests in the hand and takes form gradually. In these versions, Prometheus becomes a kind of patient artisan, kneeling over the first human shape, giving contour to something fragile and unfinished. The image has lasted because it is both ancient and intimate. It suggests that humanity itself is not a sudden miracle but a crafted being, formed through touch, attention, and time. The idea has a quiet comfort to it, as though our own imperfection were built into the beginning. That sense of shaping and incompletion also links Prometheus to another important mythic figure, Prometheus, whose name means something like afterthought. The two are often paired as opposites. One looks ahead, the other looks back too late. In the story of Pandora, Prometheus accepts the dangerous gift of the first woman after Prometheus has warned him not to receive anything from Zeus. This pairing gives the mythology a balanced structure, almost like two half-moods in the same dream. Prometheus is caution, anticipation, and foresight. Prometheus is delay, forgetfulness, and hindsight. The contrast is gentle in its simplicity, but powerful in its meaning. It suggests that human life is always moving between preparation and regret, between the wish to know beforehand and the reality of learning afterward. The stories are not harsh about this. They simply recognize it with the patience of an old teacher. And so the final resonance of Prometheus in the ancient world may be that he makes suffering intelligible without making it glamorous. He is chained but not erased. He is wounded but not silenced. He is punished for aiding humanity, yet his aid remains visible in every hearth, every crafted object, every small domestic fire that pushes back the night. The myth allows room for awe, sorrow, and gratitude all at once. Its language is often severe, but its emotional shape is strangely tender. It honors the fact that many human blessings arrive through conflict, and that some of the greatest gifts are given by figures who must then endure the consequences. In the long arc of the story, Prometheus becomes less a rebel in flames than a quiet keeper of difficult light, a presence fixed in memory like embers that continue glowing long after the room has grown still. By the time Prometheus became a familiar figure in Greek thought, he was no longer just a name in a myth. He had become a way of thinking about the relationship between intelligence and consequence, between foresight and suffering. His very name is usually understood as meaning forethinker, which already places him apart from the more impulsive gods and heroes of the stories around him. In that sense, Prometheus is less a single character than a living idea. He stands for the uneasy human belief that planning can be both a gift and a burden, that knowledge can arrive before comfort, and that seeing too far ahead can make the present feel heavier. Ancient writers did not always agree on how this name should be understood, and scholars still note the layering of meanings in it. but the broad impression remains gentle and strange. Prometheus belongs to the part of the mind that looks forward, even when the future is difficult to bear. This forward-looking quality may be one reason his stories later felt so close to human life. In some versions, Prometheus is not merely clever but painfully aware, always one step ahead of everyone else, including the powers that punish him. He is often imagined as a figure who can anticipate outcomes, who understands how small decisions gather into large consequences. That makes him quietly different from many other mythic characters whose power comes from strength, beauty, or divine birth. Prometheus's power comes from discernment, and discernment in myth as in life can be lonely. A person who sees danger early must often stand still inside that knowledge while others continue untroubled. The old stories seem to recognize this delicate sorrow. They let Prometheus become a symbol of mental alertness, but also of the cost of being awake when the world would prefer ignorance. Long before later philosophers made him a figure of abstract thought, the ancient Greeks already associated Prometheus with a certain kind of civilizing intelligence. He is frequently linked with the arts that make life livable. Fire, of course, but also craft, calculation, sacrifice, and the patient shaping of raw material into something useful. In the background of these stories lies a very old human memory, one that probably reaches beyond any single text. Fire was never only flame. It meant cooking, warmth, metalworking, protection, gathering, and the transformation of night into a place where people could remain together. So when myth says that Prometheus brought fire, it is not merely describing a theft from the gods. It is describing the arrival of a whole new condition of human life. Story feels almost like a hush falling over a room as lamps are lit. Suddenly the dark is less absolute, the cold is less final, and civilization begins to glow one careful spark at a time. Yet the ancient Greeks did not imagine that such gifts arrived without tension. Fire in Prometheus's story is never simple, never purely benevolent. It warms, but it also burns. It allows skill, but it also invites excess. That balance may be part of why the myth endured so long. It understood that every technology changes the atmosphere of life. Every new convenience creates a new vulnerability. Even in modern retellings, Prometheus often remains bound to this ambiguity. He gives humanity something magnificent, but he also introduces a permanent condition of risk. The flame in his hands is not a toy or a blessing by itself. It is a threshold. Once crossed, life can never return to its earlier, colder innocence. The myth feels restful and unsettling at once, as if it were speaking in a voice low enough for sleep, while still carrying an ember under the words. The ancient dramatic tradition helped give this ambiguity a powerful emotional shape, especially in the play often called Prometheus Bound. Whether it came entirely from Aeschylus or reflects a more complicated history of authorship, the work has long been one of the most influential portraits of the Titan. In it, Prometheus is not wandering freely through the world of legend. He is fixed in place, chained to a remote crag, with the landscape around him stripped down to rock, wind, and suffering. The drama is sparse, almost stark. There is little movement, and that stillness becomes part of its power. The audience is invited to listen to endurance itself. Voices come and go. Oceanids, the Oceanids, hover in sympathy. Other divine figures appear with threats or warnings, but Prometheus remains the center of the silence, holding his knowledge even as his body is immobilized. The play transforms myth into something nearly architectural, a chamber of pain built out of patience, resistance, and unbroken speech. That image of Prometheus on the rock is so enduring that it has often overshadowed the rest of his mythic life, but the binding is only one chapter in a much larger and older story. In Greek imagination, the mountain or cliff where he is punished becomes a place where time seems to slow. The eagle, returning day after day, turns suffering into a ritual. The wound renews itself, and so the punishment never quite ends. This repetition may be one reason the myth has such a hypnotic quality. It does not rush, it circles. It settles into an almost seasonal rhythm of anguish and repair, only to wound again. Ancient audiences would have recognized the cruelty of such cyclical torment, and modern readers still feel it. The scene is terrible, but it is also strangely meditative. It asks us to dwell on endurance, on the body held in one place, on the long interval between harm and relief. At the same time, the story of Prometheus is deeply entangled with the idea of divine authority, especially the authority of Zeus. The Titan's punishment is never just about a stolen flame. It is about a challenge to hierarchy, a refusal to accept that power should remain undisturbed. In some traditions, Prometheus is almost a political figure, though the language of politics was different in the ancient world. He becomes a symbol of resistance against arbitrary rule, a figure who speaks truth to power and suffers for it. That interpretation has appealed to many later generations, especially in times when people wanted myths to explain courage under oppression. But the older stories are more ambiguous than a simple rebellion narrative. Prometheus is not always heroic in a modern sense. He can be sly, strategic, and even secretive. His defiance is not pure idealism. It is a complicated negotiation with authority, and perhaps that is why he remains so compelling. He feels human in his mixture of motives. One of the most fascinating aspects of Prometheus's myth is his relationship to sacrifice, because this is where the story becomes oddly intimate and domestic. In some versions, Prometheus helps arrange the division of a sacrificial animal in a way that favors humans, giving them the better share while deceiving Zeus with clever presentation. This scene may seem small compared with the grand drama of fire and punishment, but it reveals the myth's deep attention to ritual life. Sacrifice was one of the central acts by which Greek communities related to the gods, the dead, and one another. It involved smell, smoke, shared meat, and the careful choreography of public piety. Prometheus's trick, then, is not merely a prank. It rearranges the structure of divine and human exchange. He introduces a subtle imbalance that becomes part of the world from then on. The act feels like a hidden hinge in the mythic house, one small turn that changes how all the doors close. Because of that sacrificial episode, Prometheus is sometimes understood as a mediator between realms. He does not belong wholly to the gods, yet neither is he fully human. He inhabits the border where offerings are made, where fire is used to send something upward and receive something back. This in-between status gives him a soft, twilight quality. He is a figure of thresholds, of negotiations, of things that pass from one state into another. In this way, his myth resembles a slowly opening and closing hand. He gives, he conceals, he disrupts, he enables. Such movements are subtle, but they shape the entire texture of human life in the stories. Prometheus is not only the bringer of fire. He is the one who teaches that all gifts involve relations, and that relations can be fragile. The smoke from sacrifice rising in the evening air seems to carry that lesson quietly into the sky. Over time, later thinkers transformed Prometheus into a symbol of intellect itself, especially creative intelligence. For philosophers, poets, and playwrights, he became associated with the spark of invention, the labor of making, the courage to imagine something not yet sanctioned by the world. This is one reason he appears so often in literature far beyond Greece. He can stand for the artist who dares, the scientist who experiments, the rebel who refuses complacency, or the lonely mind that creates under pressure. Yet the older myth always remains in the background, reminding us that creation is not free of suffering. The same fire that lets people shape metal can also mark the hand. The same thought that liberates can also isolate. In this way, Prometheus becomes one of the oldest portraits of the creative life as both luminous and painful. It is a portrait done not in bright colors, but in ember tones, with warmth and shadow inseparable. The figure of Prometheus also changed across periods, because different cultures found different needs in him. Ancient Greek readers may have seen him as a tricky helper, a dangerous benefactor, or a suffering truth-teller. Later Roman writers adapted him into their own literary world. Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers, especially, were drawn to him as a symbol of human aspiration and defiance. In those later centuries, the myth began to glow with new meanings related to progress, science, and artistic genius. But this evolution did not erase the old unease. If anything, it intensified it. The more humans imagined themselves mastering nature, the more Prometheus seemed to warn that mastery would come with a cost. That warning is still active today, though the language around it has changed. Behind every new power, the old Titan seems to wait in the background, his chains and fire and foresight folded into the history of invention. Even the famous image of the eagle has gathered layers of interpretation. In the oldest forms of the myth, the bird may have represented divine punishment in a rather direct sense, but later readers often saw something more symbolic in it. The eagle becomes recurring pain, invasive thought, the return of guilt, or the cycle of consequence that follows an act of transgression. Because the bird consumes the liver, an organ once associated with vital forces and emotional depth, the punishment gains an almost eerie intimacy. It is not a distant wound. It is interior. Ancient audiences would have understood the body differently from modern readers, but they would still have felt the horror of a suffering that renews itself from within. At the same time, the image is oddly majestic. The eagle is beautiful even as it is cruel. That mixture of splendor and violence gives the myth its lasting hush, its strange ability to feel both terrible and ceremonial. And still, beneath all the torment, Prometheus remains connected to hope. He is often remembered not simply because he suffers, but because he believes human beings are worth helping. That belief is what gives his story its human warmth. He sees frailty and chooses intervention. He sees vulnerability and answers it with fire, skill, and time. Whether he acts from pity, pride, foresight, or defiance, the result is the same. Human life becomes richer, harder, and more conscious. The myth never says this was easy, and it does not pretend the gift solved everything. But it does suggest that compassion can be costly, and that insight sometimes comes wrapped in sacrifice. In the quiet after the story is told, Prometheus feels less like a distant titan and more like a patient witness to the human condition, holding a flame steady in the dark, while the world slowly learns how to live by it. By the time Greek storytellers began shaping the figure of Prometheus into the form most people recognize, he was no longer just a single idea about fire or cleverness. He had become a kind of cultural mirror, reflecting what the Greeks admired and what they feared about intelligence itself. In some ancient tellings, he is the patient planner, the one who thinks ahead when others act too quickly. In others, he is almost unsettling in his foresight, a being whose knowledge places him a little apart from the rest of the divine world. The name Prometheus is often understood as meaning forethought, and that sense feels very fitting because he is always associated with preparation, anticipation, and the long consequences of small actions. Ancient audiences would have heard in his story a deeply human anxiety. That cleverness can bring progress, but also punishment. A person can use thought to create warmth, tools, and shelter, yet the same gift can also lead to pride, defiance, and suffering. Prometheus holds all of that together in one enduring figure, which may be part of why his story survived for so long. He is not simple comfort, and not simple rebellion either. He is the quiet, uncomfortable middle ground where wisdom becomes dangerous. And perhaps that is what made him feel so alive in the ancient imagination, as though he were standing just beyond the firelight, watching what human beings would do next. His theft of fire is the moment most closely tied to his name, but even this famous detail changes shape depending on where the story is told. In some versions, he steals fire directly from Olympus, hiding it in a fennel stalk or some similar vessel. In others, the gift of fire is less like a dramatic robbery and more like a restoration of something withheld, as if humanity had been deprived of its rightful tool. The image of fire itself carries a great deal of symbolic weight, and ancient people would have understood it as more than a practical resource. Fire meant cooked food, protection from darkness, the ability to shape metal, and the soft social gathering of people around a shared glow. It also meant danger, because fire can spread beyond intention and become impossible to control. So when Prometheus brings fire to humankind, he is not simply handing over a useful object. He is introducing transformation. The world changes when fire enters it, and human life becomes more complex, more inventive, and more vulnerable. Some scholars have noted that the myth likely preserves memories of the enormous importance of fire in early culture, when the keeping of a flame would have seemed almost miraculous. But in a mythic sense, the real gift may be consciousness itself, the spark of making, shaping, and imagining a life larger than mere survival. Prometheus gives that spark, and with it comes the long, slow awakening of civilization. There is a quieter part of Prometheus's story that is often overlooked, and yet it gives the myth a gentler, more intricate texture. In some traditions, he is not only the thief of fire, but also a benefactor of human skill. He teaches craftsmanship, calculation, architecture, navigation, and the many practical arts that allow people to build stable lives. He becomes something like a patron of technique, of patient intelligence applied to the material world. This is a fascinating detail because it moves him away from a single dramatic act and into the long, everyday process of human development. A stolen flame is memorable, but the ability to use that flame is what changes history. The ancient Greeks themselves were deeply aware of this distinction. They valued not only raw inspiration, but also techn, the craft of making things well. Prometheus, in that sense, becomes a symbol of accumulated knowledge, the kind that arrives through careful observation and repeated effort. He belongs to workshops as much as to mountains. He belongs to the quiet hands of the builder, the potter, the metalworker, and the navigator watching the stars. When told this way, the myth is less about a single act of defiance and more about the birth of human competence. It suggests that progress does not always arrive in a blaze. Sometimes it comes in measured steps, through learning how to hold warmth without being consumed by it. And yet, Prometheus's relationship with Zeus gives the whole story its tension, because the gift to humanity is also a challenge to divine order. Zeus, in many accounts, is not merely angered by the theft of fire, but by the larger principle behind it. Prometheus has acted on behalf of mortals, choosing compassion or solidarity over obedience. That choice creates an imbalance that the ruler of the gods cannot ignore. Ancient audiences would likely have recognized a familiar pattern here, authority resents being outmaneuvered, especially by someone who believes he knows what is best for vulnerable others. This is one reason the myth remains so compelling. It is not only about gods and monsters, but about power, responsibility, and the painful question of who should decide the fate of those with less strength. Zeus represents law, order, and sovereignty, but he can also seem distant or severe. Prometheus represents intervention, care, and the willingness to suffer for an act of mercy. The conflict between them is not cleanly resolved, and perhaps that is why the story lingers in the mind. It asks whether justice is always the same as obedience, and whether mercy can ever be free of consequences. In the darkness of a mythic mountain, the answer never comes all at once. It arrives slowly, like an ember under ash, still glowing even when buried. One of the most unforgettable images in the Prometheus tradition is the punishment itself, and although it is harsh, the ancient imagination treated it with a kind of solemn clarity. Prometheus is bound to a rock or mountain, often in the remote eastern reaches of the world, and every day an eagle or great bird comes to feed on his liver. Every night the organ grows back, so the suffering continues without end, or at least until some later liberating event is introduced. The liver may seem like an oddly specific target to modern readers, but in the ancient world it was often connected to life, emotion, and inward vitality. This was not a punishment of mere flesh, but of the deepest place where life seemed to renew itself. The recurring wound makes the myth feel almost geological in its endurance. The rock is cold, the sky is vast, and the bird returns with terrible regularity. There is no quick release, no simple catharsis. The pain is cyclical, like a relentless season. At the same time, the image is strangely stable, almost meditative in its repetition, because the same suffering is described with such ritual precision. Greek tragedy often returns to this kind of fixed torment, where the body becomes a site of meaning. Prometheus does not simply endure pain, he becomes a monument to it. The punishment is meant to silence him, yet paradoxically it preserves him in memory. In this way, the myth turns suffering into permanence, and permanence into a kind of testimony. There is also a powerful element of prophecy in Prometheus's story, and this is one of the reasons he is so often portrayed as knowing more than the gods expect him to know. In several versions, he possesses secret information about Zeus's future, especially regarding a marriage that could lead to the birth of a son more powerful than his father. This hidden knowledge gives Prometheus an unusual kind of leverage, even while he is bound and tortured. He is physically helpless, but mentally he remains dangerous. That imbalance is important. Ancient myth often celebrates strength, yet here it is foresight that becomes the most formidable power. Prometheus understands that the future is not fixed in the way punishment pretends it is. He knows that events unfold through choice, hesitation, and restraint. Some scholars have suggested that this prophetic dimension may have developed to make him a fitting counterpart to Zeus, who rules the present but cannot fully control what comes next. The story becomes less about simple vengeance and more about negotiation with destiny. Even in chains, Prometheus is not entirely defeated, because knowledge can survive where force cannot. There is something quietly mesmerizing about that idea. A body can be tied to a cliff, but a secret can remain untouched, tucked safely inside the mind, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. And in myth, that waiting itself becomes a form of power. Prometheus is often imagined as a solitary figure, yet the larger mythic landscape around him is crowded with other beings who reveal how ancient storytellers linked his tale to the origin of humanity. One of the most important of these figures is Prometheus, whose name means afterthought, and who stands almost like a mirror opposite to Prometheus. In some traditions, Prometheus warns Prometheus not to accept gifts from Zeus, especially the beautiful and dangerous Pandora, but Prometheus does not listen. This family resemblance between the two brothers is deeply meaningful. Where Prometheus plans ahead, Prometheus reacts too late. Where one is cautious, the other is impulsive. The contrast is gentle in concept but severe in consequence, because Prometheus's failure to foresee danger helps open the famous jar, releasing troubles into the world. The pairing of the brothers suggests that human life is shaped by both foresight and delay, by the wisdom that comes early and the realization that comes too late. It is a beautifully human pattern, and probably one the ancient Greeks understood very well. Most people know what it is to recognize a warning only after the moment has passed. By placing these two names side by side, the myth makes that experience feel almost cosmic. Thought and aftermath are siblings, preparation and regret live in the same family, and in that quiet structure, the story becomes more than a legend about a rebel titan. It becomes a meditation on timing, judgment, and the fragile difference between caution and carelessness. Pandora herself belongs to the Prometheus cycle so completely that it is difficult to separate her story from his, even though she is often treated as a different mythic thread. In some accounts, Zeus creates Pandora as a response to Prometheus's theft, sending her to humankind as a beautiful and irresistible gift that conceals trouble. Ancient writers disagree about the details, and later tradition even shifts from a jar to a box, though the original Greek word suggests a large storage vessel rather than a delicate container. What remains constant is the unsettling irony of the scene. Prometheus gives fire, and in return Zeus gives a woman whose presence releases hardship. Modern readers often notice the gendered tension here, and scholars continue to discuss how much of the myth reflects older cultural attitudes toward women, desire, and domestic vulnerability. Yet within the broader Prometheus story, Pandora is part of a larger pattern about exchange and consequence. Every gift has a price. Every act of generosity may bring an unexpected burden. The ancient world did not usually think in purely moralistic terms. It thought in terms of balance, reciprocity, and the dangerous beauty of things that seem too good to be true. Pandora's arrival deepens the emotional atmosphere of the Prometheus myth, making it less like a heroic tale and more like a cautionary meditation on human life itself. Fire warms, but it also burns. Beauty comforts, but it can also unsettle. Knowledge enlarges the world, but the enlarged world contains sorrow as well as light. The mountains associated with Prometheus also matter, because setting in myth is never just scenery. In one of the most famous versions, he is bound in the Caucasus, a distant and rugged range that ancient Greeks imagined as a remote boundary of the known world. To place Prometheus, there is to exile him not only from society, but almost from ordinary geography. The mountain becomes a threshold between civilization and wilderness, between the human and the divine. High places in myth often carry a sense of exposure, and Prometheus's rock is no exception. There is wind, cold, distance, and silence. The landscape itself seems to participate in the punishment. At the same time, mountains are places of perspective. From high above, the world below appears small and scattered, and perhaps that is fitting for a figure whose crime was to lift humanity into a larger awareness. The Caucasus setting may also have reflected ancient Greek ideas about the edges of the earth, where strange and powerful things were believed to dwell. Over time, later artists and poets would use the image of the chained Prometheus on the mountain as a symbol of endurance under impossible pressure. But the original terrain likely carried its own emotional force for ancient listeners. They would have heard not just a mountain, but a far-off place of wind, isolation, and almost sacred desolation. It is the kind of place where one can imagine a voice carrying clearly in the thin air, even if no answer comes back. Some versions of the myth eventually bring a liberator to Prometheus, and that figure is usually Heracles or Hercules in the Roman tradition. His arrival is important because it interrupts the endlessness of the punishment and introduces a rare movement toward release. Heracles passing by the rock and killing the eagle feels almost like a passing kindness in the middle of a much larger drama. He is not always portrayed as acting on pure principle. Sometimes the rescue occurs because it serves a larger task or because divine permission has finally shifted. Still, the effect is restorative. The world of myth makes room, however briefly, for mercy after long suffering. There is a curious poetry to this moment, because Heracles is himself a hero defined by labor, endurance, and strength under pressure. He understands in a bodily way what struggle means. So the release of Prometheus is not a negation of pain, but a recognition of it. The chained sufferer is not simply forgotten, he is seen, and that matters. In a sleep-friendly reading of the myth, this moment can feel like the softening edge of a long night, when the hardest part begins to loosen and a little warmth finally returns. The ancient tales rarely explain the details of the final reconciliation with perfect consistency, but the image of release remains deeply satisfying. After all the binding and repetition, there is at least the possibility that suffering does not have the last word. Even so, Prometheus never becomes merely a victim, because the enduring power of his myth lies in the combination of pain, intelligence, and generosity. He is not a perfect hero in the simple sense, and he is not a villain either. He acts, and the world changes. He suffers, and the memory of that suffering changes how people understand courage. Ancient philosophers, poets, and playwrights found in him a figure large enough to hold contradiction. He can be reckless and wise, compassionate and defiant, punished and strangely triumphant. That is perhaps why he continued to matter far beyond the original Greek setting. His story could be retold as a warning against arrogance, or as a praise of benevolence, or as a meditation on the cost of progress, or as a quiet statement that knowledge itself is inseparable from risk. In each retelling, the fire still glows in the background, and the mountain remains, and the bird returns, and the human world continues to live in the space between gratitude and consequence. It is a myth of beginnings, but not a simple one. It tells us that every bright thing may cast a shadow, and every shadow may preserve a little warmth. One of the most enduring images attached to Prometheus is the idea of stolen fire. Yet in the earliest Greek imagination, that fire is not only a tool for warmth or survival. It also stands for a boundary being crossed. In the world of myth, fire belongs to the gods in a way that ordinary human power does not fully deserve, and so Prometheus's gift is both tender and dangerous. He does not merely hand over a spark. He changes the conditions of human life itself, making cooking, crafting, metalwork, and nighttime gathering possible in a more civilized sense. The warmth of the flame in this telling is inseparable from the risk of punishment. Ancient writers seem fascinated by that double quality. Fire is comfort, but it is also ambition. It can sit quietly in a hearth glowing among ashes, while beyond the door wind moves through the dark. In some versions, the theft is made even more vivid by the image of Prometheus hiding the flame in a fennel stalk, carrying it away as though he were concealing a secret ember in a green reed. That small detail is easy to overlook, yet it makes the story feel intimate and handmade, as if civilization began with something almost fragile enough to extinguish in a hand. As the myth develops in different ancient sources, Prometheus becomes not only a benefactor, but also a figure of intelligence under pressure. His name itself, usually understood as forethought, hints at a mind that looks ahead before acting. This is one reason he often feels more complicated than a simple rebel. He is not reckless in the way some trickster figures can be. He plans, he calculates, he seems to understand consequences and still chooses the path that will hurt him. In a sense, that forethought becomes part of the tragedy. To foresee is to suffer in advance. To know what the punishment will be and to act anyway gives the story a quiet and severe dignity. Ancient audiences may have heard in him a reflection of the tension between human intelligence and divine authority, between the wish to improve life and the fear that improvement itself can be seen as overstepping. In that space, Prometheus feels almost modern because he embodies the ache of someone who understands the cost of knowledge before the cost arrives. It is also worth noticing that the myth of Prometheus was never entirely fixed. Different poets and playwrights arranged his role in different ways, and the details shift like smoke above a fire. In some older traditions, he is more of a cunning mediator between gods and humans than a bold revolutionary. In others, especially in the dramatic imagination of later authors, he becomes the suffering titan of defiance, chained and exposed to endless torment. These variations matter because they show that the ancients were not preserving a single neat story. They were returning to a family of related stories, each with its own emphasis. Sometimes the emphasis is on sacrifice, sometimes on deception, sometimes on the founding of human culture, and sometimes on cosmic punishment. That flexibility has helped Prometheus endure across centuries. He can be read as a civilizer, a victim, a trickster, a martyr, or a symbol of the human mind reaching beyond its limits. Because of that, the myth feels spacious, as if it holds many chambers, and each chamber catches a different kind of light. Among the more memorable episodes associated with Prometheus is the sacrificial trick at Mecone, where he is said to have divided an ox so that one portion looked desirable while hiding the true meat beneath less appealing material. Zeus chooses the glittering pile of bones wrapped in fat, leaving the better share for humankind. The story is odd, almost comic, and yet it speaks to serious ideas about sacrifice and social order. Ancient ritual was never just about food on an altar. It was about establishing who received what portion and why. The myth explains in symbolic form why gods are offered bones and smoke while people keep the nourishing meat. It also gives Prometheus another layer of character. He is the strategist who knows how appearances can deceive. The ancient listener may have smiled at the trick, but also recognized the deeper implication. Human life is built on arrangements, compromises, and negotiated boundaries. Even the sacred meal has politics inside it. In this way, the story of Prometheus and the sacrificial division carries the texture of a society trying to explain itself through myth, using divine quarrels to make sense of everyday custom. The punishment that follows in the famous later version is one of the most haunting images in all Greek myth. Prometheus is bound to a rock, often imagined at the edge of the civilized world, where an eagle comes each day to feed on his liver. The liver renews itself, and so the suffering repeats without end. That detail has kept scholars, storytellers, and artists returning to the image for centuries. The body becomes a site of endless regeneration and endless violation, a kind of cruel rhythm with no completion. In ancient medical thought, the liver was significant, though the exact symbolic weight it held can be difficult to pin down with certainty. What is clear is that the image of the reborn organ made the torture feel almost cosmic. It is not a wound that can be healed. It is a wound designed to persist. And yet the landscape around the punishment often matters too. The mountain, the wind, the open air, the loneliness of the cliff all contribute to the feeling that this is suffering made public by the elements themselves. The silence around the rock is as important as the eagle. It is the stillness of a world that continues to turn while one figure remains fixed in pain. In the great tragic treatment by Aeschylus, Prometheus is not merely suffering, he is also speaking. That matters deeply because the play gives him a voice that is proud, eloquent, and resistant. He lists the benefits he gave humankind: numbers, writing, memory aids, navigation, medicine, prophecy, the use of animals, the harnessing of technology, the arts of life. The speech turns Prometheus into a kind of patron of culture itself. Some of these inventions belong more to poetic imagination than to historical development, of course, and scholars have long noted that the text is less a technical catalogue than a celebration of human ingenuity. Still, the effect is powerful. Civilization appears not as a smooth gift from heaven, but as something wrested into existence by restless intelligence. The warmth of a room, the keeping of records, the ability to cross water, the knowledge of herbs and seasons, all become part of the Promethean inheritance. Even in the dark of the sleep-friendly telling, there is something soothing in that long view of human skill emerging from need, as if each tool were a small answer to a cold and difficult world. At the same time, Prometheus's gift is never free of ambivalence. The ancient sources do not present technology as simple blessing without consequence. The same intelligence that brings fire can also bring excess, pride, and separation from the natural order. That tension is especially noticeable when Prometheus is linked with the creation or shaping of humans themselves. In some later traditions, he molds people from clay, giving form to fragile matter, and Athene breathes life or mind into the figures. This image may reflect a blend of Greek thought with broader Near Eastern creation motifs, though the exact line of influence is hard to trace with certainty. What matters for the myth is the feeling that human beings are made of earth and animation together. Soft material, then consciousness, then the unsettling knowledge that comes with being alive. Prometheus, in these versions, is not simply a thief of fire but a maker of form. He bends down to the mud, to the plain substance of the world, and shapes a creature that can think about its own condition. The scene is quiet, almost tender, despite the grandeur later attached to it. One can imagine the damp earth under the fingers, the patient pressure of form taking shape, and the strange dignity of a being that is not yet complete until thought enters it. There is also a softer and less commonly discussed side to Prometheus in the ancient imagination. He is not always isolated. He is sometimes connected with prophecy, with practical wisdom, and with knowledge that allows communities to endure. In that sense, he belongs to the broader ancient world of expert figures, seers, healers, smiths, and craftsmen whose skills feel partly human and partly inspired. Greek myth often preserves these figures at the edge of society, close enough to be useful, distant enough to be uncanny. Prometheus fits that pattern well. He knows what others do not. He sees ahead. He understands hidden arrangements, yet his knowledge is not calm or detached. It is tied to feeling, to sympathy for the weak, to resistance against overbearing power. That combination of intelligence and concern gives the myth its human warmth. It suggests that wisdom is not merely possession of facts, but the ability to imagine another being's condition and act from that understanding. In the quietest reading, Prometheus becomes almost a guardian of humane foresight, the one who looks at the cold night and decides that a flame should exist somewhere for others. The image of his bondage also connects him to a long ancient fascination with chains, stones, and immobilized bodies. Greek literature often uses restraint as a sign of power's absolute claim over a body, but Prometheus's punishment is unusual because the suffering body does not become silent. He remains articulate. He argues, complains, predicts, and remembers. That verbal endurance turns his pain into a kind of ongoing testimony. The rock is meant to stop him, yet the play itself ensures that he continues to speak across time. There is something strangely calming in that persistence because it transforms torment into witness. The body is pinned down, but the voice moves freely. In a literary sense, that is one reason the myth survives so well. A figure who can think and speak from within constraint becomes unforgettable. The more still the body is, the more the mind seems to travel. Ancient audiences may have heard in this a reflection of their own experience of hardship, where inner life outlasts external limitation. The rock remains, the day passes, the eagle returns, and yet thought keeps going. Prometheus also stands at an interesting distance from the Olympian family drama around Zeus. He is often read as a challenger to tyrannical authority, though ancient Greek political ideas do not map neatly onto modern ones. Zeus is not simply a king in a human sense, and Prometheus is not merely a democratic hero. Still, the myth clearly explores the instability of rule when power does not tolerate advice or restraint. Prometheus seems to represent a form of counsel that is ignored until too late. He knows what will happen. He understands the hidden logic of events. He can see past appearances, but the ruler does not always welcome that kind of mind. In some accounts, Prometheus even possesses secret knowledge about a future threat involving Zeus's marriage or succession, and this knowledge makes him too valuable and too dangerous to destroy outright. Such episodes are clouded by variations in ancient sources, and the details can be difficult to reconstruct confidently, but the pattern is clear enough. Foreknowledge creates leverage, and leverage invites suffering. The myth therefore captures a deeply human anxiety, the fear that insight may not protect the insightful person, and may in fact make that person more vulnerable. Finally, Prometheus has remained compelling because he sits at the edge of a question that never grows old. Should a gift be judged by its consequences, or by the intention behind it? Fire can burn, tools can wound, knowledge can unsettle, and yet without them human life would be smaller, colder, and less capable of beauty. Prometheus gives anyway. He accepts the cost so that others may live differently. Whether he is a noble liberator or a troublesome deceiver depends on which ancient thread one follows. But across those versions the same mood lingers, the quiet courage of bringing something necessary into the world, even when the world is not prepared for it. That is perhaps why the myth feels so enduring in the late hours. It holds both gratitude and sorrow in the same hand. It imagines the first glow of a fire in the dark, and the long shadow that follows behind it. By the time Prometheus appears in the ancient imagination, he is already more than a simple character in a story. He has become a kind of intellectual presence, a figure who seems to stand at the boundary between instinct and thought, between the wild world and the measured human world that follows. In some traditions, he is not merely the giver of fire, but the giver of craft, patience, and foresight. His name itself is often understood as meaning something like forethought, and that idea lingers around him like a quiet shadow. It suggests that he is not impulsive, not reckless in the ordinary sense, but someone who sees consequences before they arrive. Ancient writers did not always agree on how much of this was his essential nature and how much was later interpretation, yet the association became enduring. In the cool logic of myth, this matters deeply because fire is not only warmth and light. It is planning, it is memory, it is the ability to imagine a tomorrow and make preparations for it today. That sense of foresight becomes especially vivid when the myth begins to widen beyond the single moment of theft. After the fire has been taken from Olympus, the story is no longer just about a bold act. It becomes a meditation on what happens when knowledge enters the human sphere and cannot be taken back. Fire changes everything slowly and quietly. It cooks food, strengthens tools, hardens clay, and lengthens the evening hours. It gathers people together in the orange flicker of light, where speech can continue after sunset and stories can be repeated from one generation to the next. So when Prometheus gives fire, he is not handing over a mere object. He is introducing a condition of civilization itself. Later Greek thinkers sometimes treated him almost like a symbolic ancestor of technology, while poets made him a tragic benefactor whose gift always comes with a cost. There is a softness to that idea, even in its severity. Human life becomes richer, but also heavier, more self-aware, more vulnerable to its own inventions. The ancient sources also preserve a fascinating tension around how Prometheus accomplished the theft. Some tell of him stealing the fire from Zeus's own lightning or from the divine hearth. Others imagine him concealing the flame inside a hollow fennel stalk, a plant that would smolder for a time while protecting the precious ember within. That image is particularly memorable because it feels so humble. The great power of fire is carried not in gold or in royal treasure, but in a simple stalk gathered from the earth. Scholars have often noted that this detail may reflect older ritual memories or practical observations from everyday life, since dry plant stems could indeed serve as portable containers for flame. The image gives the myth a tactile, human quality. One can almost picture the thin tube, warm to the hand, its hidden glow traveling through darkness like a secret. It is the kind of detail that makes myth feel close enough to touch, and that closeness is part of its enduring charm. Yet the story does not end with the gift itself. In many versions, Zeus's response is not immediate thunder, but something more deliberate, more unsettling. The punishment is designed to be memorable, to extend across time rather than vanish in a single moment of anger. Prometheus is bound to a remote cliff, often imagined somewhere at the edge of the world, and an eagle comes each day to feed on his liver. At night the liver grows back, and the cycle begins again. This image of recurring suffering has troubled readers for centuries, partly because it mixes physical torment with a strange, almost mechanical rhythm. It is not a brief catastrophe but a repeating one, and the repetition itself becomes part of the punishment. Some scholars think the liver's regeneration may have symbolized the body's mysterious capacity for renewal, while others point to older Near Eastern motifs in which an eternally afflicted figure endures as a warning or a sacrificial emblem. In any case, the scene is severe, but also solemnly still, like a myth carved in stone and left to weather in the mountain air. Over time, however, Prometheus ceases to be only the bound rebel. He becomes a figure of endurance, even dignity. In later literature, especially in philosophical and dramatic traditions, his suffering can be read not merely as defeat but as steadfast resistance. He does not repent in any simple way. He does not collapse into obedience. Instead, he remains knowing, watchful, and inwardly unbroken. This is one reason the myth has continued to attract so many writers. It can be interpreted politically as a tale of defiance against tyranny. It can be interpreted ethically as a story about whether kindness to humanity requires disobedience to power. It can also be interpreted psychologically as a portrait of the burden that comes with insight. To know more may be to suffer more. To help others may be to attract punishment. Ancient audiences could feel all of these possibilities at once, and the myth holds them together with surprising calm. It is both heroic and mournful, both luminous and severe. There is also a quieter strand in the tradition that connects Prometheus not only with fire, but with the shaping of human beings themselves. In some accounts, he molds humanity from clay, working with the earth as if with softened wax or damp riverbank mud. This makes him less like a distant deity and more like a patient artisan. The image is intimate and almost domestic. Clay is a material that remembers the press of hands. It holds fingerprints, and it can be reworked if the form is not yet right. By giving Prometheus this role, the myth suggests that human beings are made with care, but also with incompleteness. We are fashioned beings, not self-made ones. And because clay can crack in the sun or dissolve in rain, there is always a fragile quality to the creation. Some ancient authors connected this motif to broader creation myths from the Mediterranean and Near East, where humans are often formed from earth, ash, or river silt. Prometheus, in that setting, becomes the thoughtful sculptor who understands that life begins in the soil and remains linked to it. The name of Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus, deepens the contrast. If Prometheus is forethought, Epimetheus is afterthought, the one who understands too late. Their stories are often paired in ways that feel almost like two movements of a single meditation. Epimetheus accepts gifts without careful reflection, and in one famous version, he receives Pandora, bringing trouble into the human world. Prometheus, by contrast, sees more clearly, but seeing clearly does not free him from consequence. This pairing is one of the myth's most elegant features, because it transforms a family relationship into a pattern of thought. It suggests that human life is shaped both by planning and by error, by anticipation and by delay. No ancient source gives us a perfectly unified picture of the brothers, and perhaps that uncertainty is appropriate. Myths often work best when they remain a little porous, allowing the mind to drift through them and notice the echo between one figure and another. The connection between Prometheus and Pandora is especially important because it prevents the fire myth from becoming too simple. If Prometheus only gave a blessing, the story might seem purely celebratory. But the tradition insists that blessings arrive in a world where vulnerability is already present. Pandora's jar, or box in later retellings, opens and releases hardship, labor, illness, and sorrow into human life. This is not necessarily a contradiction to Prometheus's gift. Rather, it suggests that civilization itself contains both advancement and burden. Fire can warm the house, but it can also scorch. Craft can make life easier, but it can also bring new forms of dependence and risk. Ancient commentators sometimes treated these myths as separate strands, while others saw them as intimately linked parts of a larger account of human condition. In a sleepy, reflective way, that linkage feels almost inevitable. The light that guides us may also reveal what was hidden. The same knowledge that comforts may also disturb. One of the most intriguing aspects of Prometheus in later thought is how often he becomes associated with scientific ambition. Much later writers, especially in the modern period, recognized in him a symbol of invention, experimentation, and the desire to cross forbidden boundaries in the name of progress. That association is not explicit in the earliest myths, of course, but it grows naturally from the image of fire as a transformative force. Fire is the first great technology in many cultural imaginations, a point at which the human hand begins to cooperate with natural power. It is not surprising, then, that the name Prometheus would eventually be attached to laboratories, engines, electricity, and even space exploration in imaginative literature. Yet the older meaning still lingers beneath these later developments. The gift is never only triumph, it is also trial. Human beings become capable of more, but they are also responsible for more. The myth seems to know this in advance, as if it had foreseen our own age from afar. In the ancient festivals and ritual worlds of Greece, Prometheus was not only a literary figure, he also occupied a place in civic memory, especially in Athens, where he was linked with craftspeople, torch races, and certain forms of communal worship. The torch race in particular has a beautiful, almost dreamlike quality. Teams of runners passed a flame from one torch to another through the night, preserving fire through motion, cooperation, and timing. Scholars often see in such rituals a living echo of the Prometheus story, though it can be difficult to know whether the myth shaped the ritual or the ritual shaped the myth. Probably, like many ancient traditions, they influenced each other over time. There is something gentle about that uncertainty. It reminds us that myths are not fixed statues but moving patterns, carried by human hands, altered by use, and kept alive through repetition. In this sense, Prometheus belongs not only to old texts, but to the embodied memory of people who ran with fire in the dark. Another fascinating detail is the way Prometheus can be both proud and compassionate without ever feeling fully contradictory. He disobeys Zeus, but not out of vanity alone. He acts because he cares about human beings, who in some versions are weak, cold, or unable to defend themselves. The myth does not present him as a flawless saint, and perhaps that is why he feels so enduringly human. He has judgment but also attachment. He knows the cost but proceeds anyway. This blend of wisdom and risk gives the story its emotional weight. Some ancient philosophers admired that quality and read Prometheus as a figure of practical intelligence. Others were more cautious, warning that beneficence without proper cosmic order can invite disaster. Both attitudes may be present in the tradition at once. In the stillness of late thought, Prometheus can seem almost like a symbol of all generous actions that go beyond permission, all acts of care that must answer to something larger than themselves. In the end, what makes Prometheus so lasting is not only the drama of theft or punishment, but the texture of the ideas gathered around him. He is a maker, a planner, a rebel, a teacher, a sufferer, and perhaps even a mirror of humanity's own mixed nature. The myths about him do not resolve into a single meaning, and that may be their greatest strength. They remain open enough to hold firelight, sorrow, ingenuity, and restraint all at once. When later generations return to Prometheus, they often find themselves looking at their own civilization in his shape. They see the spark, the cost, the courage, the wound, and the long afterlife of a choice made once in the deep past. And in that quiet reflection, the old Titan continues to burn, not loudly, but steadily, like an ember protected in the hollow of a stem, carried onward through the dark. In the later retellings of Prometheus, one of the most curious details is that the punishment does not simply end with pain, but with repetition. The liver grows back each day, and the eagle returns again, as if the myth is designed to deny any clean conclusion. Ancient listeners may have understood this as a symbol of a universe where suffering could be renewed by the cycle of day and night, or by the rhythm of seasons, or by the endless renewal of human need itself. The liver, in Greek thought, was often tied to emotion, vitality, and the hidden workings of the body, so the image would have felt intimate and unsettling. It is not only a wound, but a restoration that makes the wound possible again. That quiet horror gives the story its strange tenderness as well, because survival is built into the punishment. Prometheus is not extinguished. He remains present, conscious enough to endure, and that endurance becomes part of his identity. In some readings, this recurring torment makes him less like a defeated criminal and more like a permanent fixture in the moral landscape, a being whose suffering continues to ask questions long after the fire has been given. There is also a softer, almost domestic side to the myth that can be easy to overlook. Prometheus is not only the one who steals fire, he is often imagined as a careful planner, a craftsman of foresight, a figure who thinks ahead when others do not. His very name is usually linked to forethought, while his brother Prometheus is linked to hindsight, the realization that comes too late. That contrast is simple, but it has lasted for centuries because it feels so human. One brother sees consequences before they arrive, and the other understands them after the fact. In the oldest stories, this difference becomes painfully important when Prometheus accepts Pandora and the gifts that accompany her, despite earlier warnings. The myth seems to suggest that civilization itself depends on both kinds of thought, the cautious planning of Prometheus and the belated understanding of Prometheus, yet the balance is unstable. Knowledge can be protective, but it can also bring loneliness. Foresight can save a community, but it may isolate the one who sees too much. In that way, Prometheus becomes not just a rebel but a tragic thinker, someone who lives inside the burden of anticipation. As the story moved through different Greek regions and later into Roman and modern literature, Prometheus began to gather meanings that would have been separate in older ritual life. He could stand for the courage to challenge authority, but also for the dangers of cleverness without restraint. He could be a patron of inventors, sculptors, and those who work with the hands, because fire belongs to cooking, forging, shaping, and transforming. At the same time, he could appear as a warning that gifts taken from the divine are never simple gifts. The Greeks did not always separate benefit from cost the way a modern story might. A thing that helps human beings may also alter them in deep and irreversible ways. Fire warms, but it burns. It cooks food, but it also consumes wood. It illuminates darkness, but it reveals what was hidden. In a quiet way, the myth understands technology itself as a double-edged blessing. Prometheus does not merely hand over a useful tool. He introduces a condition of life in which humanity is always slightly closer to power and always slightly closer to danger. That tension is part of why the tale still feels so modern, even after so many centuries. Another layer of the myth emerges when we notice how often it has been linked to creation stories. In some traditions, Prometheus is said to shape human beings from clay or earth, sometimes with the help of Athene, who breathes life into them or supports his work in some manner. These accounts are not always consistent, and ancient sources vary in the details, which is part of their charm. What remains steady is the idea of humanity as something molded, something formed by hands before it fully understands itself. Clay is a patient material. It can be pressed, smoothed, and reworked, but it also dries, hardens, and remembers the shape it was given. When Prometheus fashions humanity, the image suggests both intimacy and fragility. Human beings are made from the same earth they walk upon, and perhaps that is why the myth feels so close to the ground. It imagines people not as grand cosmic beings, but as vulnerable creations needing shelter, skill, and fire in order to continue. The story places human life in a modest register. We are made of mud and breath, and our achievements arise from materials that would otherwise remain silent. The punishment of Prometheus also has a political dimension that later readers found impossible to ignore. In tragic and philosophical works, he comes to resemble the dissenter who refuses to flatter power. Zeus, depending on the version, can appear as a stern ruler establishing cosmic order after the chaos of Titan rule. Prometheus, by contrast, introduces a kind of unauthorized compassion. He gives what the ruler has withheld. That act can be interpreted as justice, but also as civil disobedience. Ancient audiences lived in societies where hierarchy was deeply felt, yet debate about authority was never absent. The story therefore held a delicate ambiguity. It did not simply declare rebellion good and kingship bad. Instead, it asked what kind of authority deserves obedience, and what kind of suffering is imposed in the name of order. This ambiguity is one reason the myth was so useful to later poets and thinkers. It could be made to speak about tyranny, about governance, about the limits of law, or about the loneliness of reformers who believe the future will vindicate them. And still, beneath all those arguments, the myth remains simple in its imagery: a chained body on a mountain, a bird arriving each day, a silence that feels almost geological. At the same time, the story of Prometheus was never entirely separate from the human experience of craft. In Greek religious practice, fire was not only a force of destruction, it was also central to sacrifice, cooking, metalwork, and communal life. A hearth was more than a place to warm oneself. It was a center of household continuity, a point around which family and city could be imagined. To give fire to humanity, then, is to give more than sparks. It is to give a center. It is to permit a settled way of living, one in which raw materials are transformed through patience and skill. Some scholars have suggested that the myth may preserve distant memories of the importance of controlled fire in the development of human communities, though such connections remain speculative. Even so, the symbolism is remarkably steady. Before fire, there is darkness and limitation. After fire, there is the possibility of night activity, of cooked food, of warmth through cold seasons, of metal drawn from stone, of stories told in the glow of a communal flame. Prometheus becomes the mythic figure behind that domestic miracle. His gift is heroic, but also practical in the humblest sense. Yet the Greeks were never likely to let a powerful story remain only uplifting. The same fire that enables civilization also carries an atmosphere of theft, transgression, and the crossing of boundaries that perhaps should not be crossed. In some versions, the gods have already decided that humans will remain limited, perhaps because limitation is part of cosmic balance. Prometheus's intervention then becomes a kind of redistribution, an unauthorized correction of the world's hierarchy. This is why his myth can feel so unsettlingly contemporary. It asks whether progress is always legitimate, whether all withheld knowledge should be seized, and whether a benefactor who breaks the rules for a noble reason is still answerable for the consequences. There is no simple answer hidden inside the ancient tale. Instead, the story lets the tension remain open, as if the sparks from the stolen fire still drift in the air. One can admire the courage and still feel the danger. One can value human advancement and still recognize the cost of acquiring it. The myth does not hurry to resolve this contradiction, and that lingering uncertainty is part of its power. Prometheus's association with suffering also made him especially meaningful to later philosophical traditions that valued endurance, discipline, and inner freedom. A bound body can still contain a resistant mind. A punished figure can still refuse complete submission. In this sense, Prometheus became a symbol for those who believe that dignity may survive even in conditions of external defeat. The image is quiet but strong. On the mountain, he has no tools, no allies, no chance to reverse the visible verdict imposed on him. And yet the story does not portray him as broken in spirit. He knows something the ruler does not know or does not yet know. He carries foresight into the place where foresight seems useless. That paradox gave later writers a rich emotional center to work with. Pain becomes not merely pain, but a place where insight remains awake. Suffering becomes a stubborn kind of witness. The myth then moves beyond punishment toward philosophical reflection, suggesting that what is denied by force may still persist in consciousness. For a sleepless listener, that image has a strange calmness in it, because it describes endurance without spectacle, a steady presence that continues through darkness. The meeting between Prometheus and Pandora is another part of the larger mythic atmosphere that often deepens his meaning. Pandora is sometimes remembered mainly as the source of human troubles, but the older tradition is more layered than that. Her arrival is not simply a punishment dropped into the world. It is part of a web of exchange, delay, concealment, and divine response. Prometheus has already taken from the gods. The gods then answer through a different kind of gift, one that contains both beauty and burden. The jar or box associated with Pandora becomes a container of release, of things once held back now entering the human sphere. Some scholars have noted that the story may originally have emphasized a jar rather than a box, and that later tradition shifted the image. Either way, the emotional logic remains the same. Gifts are rarely pure. They are mixed with consequences, and human life is shaped by what escapes, what is withheld, and what cannot be put back. Prometheus and Pandora therefore belong to the same broad meditation on exchange. One steals fire upward into human hands, the other opens a vessel that lets troubles move outward into the world. In both cases, the world after the event is no longer the world before it. In artistic tradition, Prometheus has often been depicted in ways that stress his isolation. Painters and sculptors loved the contrast between the bound body and the open landscape, between human vulnerability and the immense scale of mountain or sky. That visual contrast helps explain why the myth has lasted so long in the imagination. It is easy to place oneself in the scene. The world is vast, but the body is finite. The sky is distant, but the chain is immediate. The eagle does not need to represent only the bird itself. It can also stand for inevitability, for time, for the returning force that cannot be negotiated with. And yet artists often soften the image with a kind of beauty. The mountain may be luminous, the dawn may wash over the cliff, the figure of Prometheus may appear strong even in agony, his posture full of tension rather than collapse. This aesthetic richness does not erase the cruelty of the story. Instead, it allows the cruelty to be contemplated without overwhelm. The myth becomes a place where darkness and beauty remain side by side, where punishment is seen against a horizon, and where suffering is framed by light. Even the end of Prometheus's torment in the versions that allow him release is often less final than it appears. Some traditions connect his liberation to Heracles, who kills the eagle and breaks the chain, but the rescue is not always simple or permanent in every telling. Myths survive by changing shape, and Prometheus is no exception. His release can symbolize reconciliation, the eventual incorporation of rebellion into the order of the world, or the recognition that even divine judgment may bend toward mercy. Yet because the tale has been told so many ways, the ending feels open rather than sealed. That openness is fitting. Prometheus belongs to stories that do not close neatly because the questions he raises remain alive. What should be shared with humanity? What must be earned? What ought to be forbidden? How much suffering is demanded by progress, and who gets to decide? The myth does not answer all of this. It simply keeps the questions burning in a controlled and enduring flame, like a hearth that never quite goes out.